Hey there everybody, welcome back. This is Jamie Cross for Game Dev Tuts Plus. This is the second half of the Angry Birds in Game Salad tutorial screencast. In the first half we built the basis of the game. We added most of the graphics, the snowman, the gun, the background, made the snowball work, and got a lot of the basic functionality working. In the second half of the video, this part of the video, we're going to finish it up. We're going to add the camera controls. We're going to add a trail on the snowball. Certainly do some testing to make everything, or make sure everything works right. So if you haven't watched the first half, definitely do that, or else you'll probably be a little bit lost in this one. And we'll get started. The first thing I want to do in this tutorial is add a couple more game level attributes. And I'll explain these as I add them in here. The first one I'm going to add is an integer. I'm going to call this snowballs. And what this is going to do is going to keep track of the snowballs in the game. We're going to give the player 10 snowballs to shoot. And this will keep track of the snowballs that have been shot so far. I'm going to add another integer called blocks. And we'll use this to keep track of the various snow fort blocks in the game, so we can know when they've all been destroyed. We're going to add another integer. I'm going to call this ball trail, and this is going to be used for making the trail on the snowball when it's shot out of the gun. It's going to go back and forth. It's almost like a Boolean. It's going to go back and forth between 0 and 1. And we're actually going to set up two trails. Only one will be displayed on screen at a time. And this variable will let us know which one to show on screen whenever they're needed. I'm going to make another one. And this is a Boolean. I'm going to call this ball hit. And this is going to keep track of the first time a ball hits anything, the ground, a block. And when it does come in contact with something, we're going to shut the trail off, so we don't get all kind of bouncy trails around the snow fort when the ball is bouncing around in between blocks. I want to shut it off as soon as it hits something. So we're going to use this variable for that. And then one last one. This is another Boolean. I'm going to call this start. And I'm going to set this one true to start with. And what this is going to do is it's going to let us know the first time we start the game. When it is the very first time, we're going to set up the camera scroll like you saw in the demo on the first video, where the camera scrolls over to the snow fort to show it and then scrolls back to the snowman, just like in Angry Birds. Now let me add an ice block here. We haven't set up any behaviors for it. In fact, I'm going to have to set up a couple behaviors for it before we test the gun. So let me add one of these and jump in here and add a couple behaviors. I want to add an accelerate to give this object gravity, just like the snowball. And I want it to always be down towards the ground. And this, I want it to seem a little heavier and a little slower motion, I guess, than the snowball. So I'm going to leave the acceleration here at 100 instead of 300 like I did the snowball. And this will make them act a little different physically. And also, along with that, the physics settings of this are going to be a little bit different. The density I'm setting at 25. The friction I'm going to set at 5 because it's ice and it's meant to be a little slippery. And the bounciness, I'm going to set that up the same as the snowball, so it bounces just a little bit. And also under graphics, no, I'm sorry, it's under color, I want to change this so it's just slightly transparent. Since it is ice, I want you to be able to see through it a little bit in game, and you'll see. Let me jump back. I didn't set up the ground collisions yet, but maybe you could see as that passed through there. Let's go back and set up those collisions real quick. I'm going to do a group, and I'm just going to bring in a couple collisions here. I'm going to say collide with ground. I'm going to copy that and also set it up to collide with other bricks, so they would bounce off of each other. Now let's preview that. And you can see it's now setting on the ground, which before it just passed through. And you can see there's some of the tree behind it here. In fact, let me just move that to a new spot. Even in the editor here, you can see how the transparency affects it. So it looks a little more like ice. It looks like an ice block that you can see through instead of a solid object. So now let's try the gun and see what happens. It should shoot a snowball, spawn it out, shoot across the screen, and knock that ice block over. So let's see how things have worked out so far. And it did. You can see it hit the ice block, bounced off it, and sent the ice block flying across screen. There's definitely something wrong with my power bar because it was shooting full strength immediately. Let me reload and try that. Well, there, now it seemed to work fine. That's interesting. Let me reload again. That's interesting. If I hold the key down and let it start to power up, it seems to work properly. But if I just press the space bar once, it seems to be shooting at full strength immediately. So I'm going to have to troubleshoot that and figure out why that's doing that. Let me power it up, and you can see. Let's see if the snowball disappears after 5 seconds, and I can shoot again, which I can. So for the most part, it's working correctly. Let me troubleshoot the power meter, and we'll get this worked out. Just so you know what I've gone through, I've done some play testing, and I found out what the problem was. And you know, there's a little introduction to the world of game development. Even when you have things already figured out once and working right, sometimes you can easily make a mistake and miss something when you're going through to do, say, for example, a screencast. So I'm going to show you what I did here to solve the problem. What I did is I made just a test actor originally to keep track of the game.power attribute I set up. And what I did was I put a display text in just a white boxed actor, and I put that on screen. It always gives me a readout now of the power variable, and you can see now that I've gone through it, it's working correctly. I can shoot very softly, or I can power it up all the way and really blast things. So by being able to keep track of that variable, I tracked down in the gun, in the loading the gun routine, I had neglected to set a starting value for start power. It was set at 0, but it shouldn't always be 0. What I neglected to do was I drug in a change attribute, and I'm changing the attribute self start power to the value of this object's time, which is then picked up here, self time minus self dot start power. And that's why the power wasn't working exactly right. It was always starting from 0, and obviously that's not right. It needed to be starting from the time you press the space bar instead of from 0. And while I'm doing that, I also noticed the snowball. I missed a setting here. Oh, let me see. Under physics, maybe? The collision shape, since it's a ball, it's not bouncing around right. I don't know if you can tell in the video, but when I shoot it, it kind of bounces incorrectly because I had the collision shape set to rectangle And clearly, since it's a ball, you want to set that to a circle. And now it rolls right on the ground. It wasn't rolling smoothly before. That's how I noticed that. So there you go. Anybody can make a mistake, and you just need to troubleshoot it a little bit, spend a few minutes. It didn't take me long to find that error. It took me maybe 5 minutes or so. Now that that's worked out, and the gun is working right, and the ball is rolling right, the snowball, let's finish off this ice block and get that complete. Then I'll use that as to copy and paste and make all the other ice blocks and snow blocks for the game. The first thing I want to do to the ice block that we've already started is I want to add an actor attribute. And now what this is, it's going to be an integer. I'm going to call it hit speed. And we're going to use this along with the ball speed to determine if the ice block or any of the other blocks should be destroyed when they're hit by the snowball. So to do that, I need to add another rule in here. And I'm going to set this up. If this actor overlaps, if the ice block overlaps or collides with the snowball, I'm going to do a change attribute. And I'm going to change this hit speed that we just set up. So I'm going to say ice block, hit speed. I'm going to change that to the value of ball speed, which we just set up a few minutes ago in the beginning of this tutorial. Now we'll need to add another rule to control whether the ice block should be destroyed or not when the ball hits it. So we're going to use these values we just set, the self hit speed. So I'm going to set attribute self hit speed. If that is greater than or equal to 100, then this block is going to be destroyed. And if it's less than 100, then the block won't be destroyed. It'll just fall over. So the first thing we want to do is do a change attribute and change the game level blocks to game level blocks -1. Now I'm not really going to be doing anything with this value beyond this in this tutorial. This is really if you want to extend this a little further after this tutorial is over with and add some end game logic or logic to move on to another level or something. Game blocks is going to be the number of blocks you have to destroy, and each time you destroy one, game blocks will be reduced by 1. So you'll be able to tell when you've destroyed all the blocks. You could then do something if you wanted to. Like I said, I'm not going to do anything with that in this tutorial, but it'll be there if you want to continue. I'm going to make a group, drag this in here. I'm going to call this shrink blocks when dead. How about spelling shrink correctly? Shrink blocks when dead. And I'm just going to group these together just for convenience. It helps me see things all together as a group. Instead of just making this block disappear when it gets hit, I want to make it shrink down and disappear just for a little added variety, something fun to watch. It's not going to take long to happen, so it's not going to slow down the pace of the game. So what I want to do is first drag an interpolate behavior in there. And then I want to interpolate the width of this block. So I'm going to go size, width. I want to interpolate it from whatever it is to 0. And I want that to take 1 second. Oh, I'm sorry, I want to take that 0.3 seconds. 1 second would be too slow. I'm going to copy that. And also interpret the height down to 0 over the same 0.3 seconds. And then I want to add a timer in here to destroy the block after those 0.3 seconds go by. So let me drag timer in. Scroll this down a little so we can see what's going on. Say after 0.3 seconds, destroy this block. There we go, destroy this actor. And I'll run that to completion. Let's give that a test. That should work. So I'll just do a light shot so it shouldn't destroy it. It hit it, but now it's going to wait 5 seconds and it should destroy the ball. There we go. Let me power it up a little more. That seemed a little hard. Maybe not hard enough to kill it. Let's see. Oh no, I know the problem. The problem is in the snowball actor, I haven't accounted for or set up the game ball speed behavior yet. So let me do that. That's going to be a constraint attribute. I'm going to drag that in here. I'm going to constrain game ball speed to the magnitude of, let me get these out of here, the magnitude of self motion, where's the motion, linear velocity x and self motion linear velocity y. And that formula right here will give me the speed that the ball is traveling on screen, and that assigns that to ball speed. Now hopefully the gun will work. Let's see. There we go. I hit it fast enough that it shrunk down and disappeared and destroyed. Now let me make sure when I hit it very softly that it doesn't. There we go. So that is now working properly. There we go. Yep, working good. Let's go back. I can check the ice block and make sure I did everything I needed to do before I use that as a base for all the other blocks. We have the gravity, which is working, the regular collides, setting the ball speed, hit speed, and the destruction of the block. I believe that's it. Now what I'm going to do is bring in the graphics for all of the other block pieces. Let me go down to images. We'll get these added in. I'm going to add the small ice block. I'm going to add a graphic for the snowball trail while I'm at it. That way I don't have to come back and do it later. So I've added this, I believe, is the snowball trail. You'll see it's just a white circle essentially. Same as the snowball, just doesn't have the highlight or the shadow on it. And I've added an ice block, a snow big block, a small ice block or snow block, and a piece of wood. Now I'm going to duplicate this large ice block and replace its image with the small ice block. All of the large ice block settings should stay the same, but let's check those. Still got all the same behaviors. All of these blocks are going to act the same way. It's got hit speed in there for the small block, which I'll need. And I'm going to leave the physics for the large and small ice blocks set the same, so those are all fine. Let's go back and do the next one. I'll duplicate this large ice block again. I'm going to pull in the graphic for the big snow block, drop that on there. All the settings are set up, everything should be good to go. The physics I'm going to change just a little bit since it's meant to be snow and not ice. Let's see, for the snow blocks, I'm going to make the density 15, so they'll theoretically be a little bit lighter in game. The friction 15, they won't be quite as slippery as the ice blocks. And I'm going to make the bounciness 0.15, so they won't be quite as bouncy. And I also want to change the alpha on the color. I want these to be solid, not transparent. So there's the large snow block. I'm going to duplicate that and bring up the image for the small snow block. So that one's good to go. duplicate this and make the last block the wood block. I'm going to drag this up there. Check the settings for that. Again, the physics for the wood I'm going to change up just a little bit just to add some variety to the game. Density, I'm going to make that 10, so that's the lightest of all objects. Friction 50, so it'll slow things down on it. And bounciness, this is going to be fairly bouncy at 0.6. So that's all the blocks added. I'm going to add them in here just to make sure everything works right. Let me delete that. I'm going to add, you know what, let me rename these first. I see they all got named as copies. So I'm going to do ice block small, snow block large, snow block small, and wood. You know, another thing, or a thing I'll have to do before I add them into the game area, is set up the tags correctly. So let me go to actors. Oh, all of the bricks, they got tagged because I made copies of that. Very convenient. Alright, so let's add these in here. And this is really just a test, just to make sure things act as they're supposed to. I'm going to set them up in the air a little bit so they kind of drop and bounce and fall. And see what happens. There they go. So they work correctly. That's exactly what I expected to happen. Everything hits the ground, everything bounces off each other, and everything is working as expected. Before I bother to build the snow fort over here on the brick platform, I need to set up a couple things. I need to set up a game controller, basically an invisible actor that's going to control the camera when you shoot the ball. And then I'll need to set up a game boundary to stop the ball from going out of bounds. Right now, if it goes out of bounds, it just stops. The game kind of locks up and it doesn't know what to do. So I'll need to fix that. So let's add the game controller first. I'm going to add a new actor, call it controller. I'm just going to make it a color. It's eventually going to be hidden completely so you won't see it. But just so I can see it during development, I'm going to make it red. Drag it in here, reduce its size a little bit. I don't want it to get in the way, but I don't want to lose it either. So I'm going to tuck it down here in the corner where nothing's ever really going to happen. I'm going to open this up and unlock it. And what I need to do here is a couple things originally. It's going to control the zooming of the camera right now, so I need to add a couple rules. The first rule is going to check and see if the game level attribute snowball is true, then it's going to zoom the camera out and follow the ball as it moves across the screen. So I'm going to use an interpolate behavior, a couple of them, to control the camera. Let me bring the first one in. And I want to control the current scene, camera, size, width. And I want that to zoom from what is its current size of 480. I want that to zoom to 960. And I want that to take 1 second. So I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to also zoom the camera size height. And I'm going to zoom that from its current size of 320 up to 640. So that's if there's a snowball on screen, that's what's going to happen. Let me call this zoom out. Close that up. And I'm going to make another rule for the zoom in. Call this zoom in, and just like the first one, we're going to check the game level attribute snowball. This time, if it's false, the camera is going to zoom back in and give control back to the snowman. So we're going to use interpolate for that again. Current scene, camera, size, width. I want to interpolate that to 480. And I want this to take 2 seconds. The zoom back in is going to be just a little slower than the zoom out, just for some variety. So I want to also take the width down. I mean the height, excuse me. Height down to 320. Now I also need to physically move the camera back to the snowman. So that's going to be a couple more interpolate behaviors. I didn't need to move it for the zoom out because I'm going to add a behavior to the snowball so the camera knows to automatically follow the snowball across the screen. But once the snowball is destroyed and game snowball is false, I need to manually move the camera back to the snowman. So to do that, again, I'm going to go to the camera. I'm going to change its origin, X to 0, over 2 seconds as well. I'm going to change its origin, Y to 0 as well, over 2 seconds. And that should mostly control the zooming of the camera. Let me go back out here to the actors. We'll need to add a boundary before I bother shooting, because once it goes off screen it would just get confused and kind of lock up because I haven't told it what to do yet. So let me add another actor here. Call it boundary. I'm just going to make this blue. This is never going to be seen by the player either. I'm going to drag this on here. I'm going to put one on the left. It's not very likely that the ball would ever roll all the way off the left-hand side of the screen, but you never know. So just to be safe, I'm going to put one there. I'm going to make it really tall. I'm going to make it like 2,500 pixels high. That's really more for the right-hand side of the screen in case you aim up and shoot at high power. It hopefully would not go over top of the boundary and lock up. Now I'm going to hold down Option, make a copy of the boundary from the left, drag that over to the far right side of the screen, and get that placed to act as a boundary on the right side. And drag that off here a little bit, just leave a little space so the ball can roll off screen and it won't bounce back or disappear before it should. I'm going to make another copy of this. I'm going to bring it down here where I can rotate it easily. Maybe make it a little bigger so I can get a hold of the handles. I'm going to rotate it and use this one for the sky boundary. Let me get that dragged in place, make sure it covers the full sky, right and left, which it does. Then I'm going to put this up fairly high in the sky. I'm going to set the Y position to 900. And what that does, that'll move it up off of the sky, even beyond the boundary of the image of the background here. It'll give me a little space to arc the ball up, and it could disappear off the top of the screen and come back down in. But if you shoot too far up into the sky, it'll hit the boundary and reset the game. To finish off the boundary, I need to make sure that I've turned the physics on it off. Let me head over there. Make sure all this stuff is set to nothing. And we definitely don't want this movable, or else it would drop off screen, kind of like the ice block was before I set it up to collide with the ground. So you want to make sure that's not movable. And also that saves some, some processing power from the physics engine as well. And we need to make a change to the snowball actors routine. I need to add another rule to that. And this is going to reset the snowball when it comes in contact with a boundary. So I need to set up when actor receives event, overlaps or collides with the boundary. I'm going to change the attribute. Game snowball to false. That'll reset the snowball. And then I also need to destroy this actor. So let's give that a test and make sure it works right. I'm going to shoot with some power here to get all the way across the screen. And it clearly hit the boundary and scrolls back to the snowman. So that's working as expected. Let me shoot straight up, or as straight up as I can, and make sure the boundary in the sky works. I'm going to give that a full power shot as well. And yes, it must have hit that and scrolls back to the snowman. Now let's add the snowball trail to the snowball. The first thing I want to do to make that work is create a new actor for the trail. I'm going to drag up the snowball trail graphic into the actors pane, and that will create a snowball trail. I'm going to rename this because there's actually going to be two of these. I'm going to call this Snowball Trail 0, and I'm going to hold down Option and copy that and name this Snowball Trail 1. Now I'll go into Snowball Trail 0, and I need to add one behavior to these trails. I'm going to create a rule, and I'm going to say when the attribute game snowball trail, actually I just have it called ball trail, so when attribute game ball trail equals 1, I'm going to destroy this actor. I'm going to copy this and paste it into snowball trail 1 and say when game ball trail equals 0, destroy this actor. And you'll see in a minute I'm going to set up a behavior where it toggles between 0 and 1 depending on which trail is on screen. So if trail 1 is on screen, or it will destroy trail 0, and if trail 0 is on screen, it will destroy trail 1. And that'll make a little more sense maybe once you see it in action. On these trails, the trail actors, I also want to make sure I turn all the physics properties off because they're not going to be movable. They're just going to be for display on screen. So I'm going to shut all that off on both. Let me go to the second one. Get all the physics turned off. There we go. Now I will go into the snowball actor, and that's what's going to leave the trail behind as it flies through the air. So let's create a rule. I'm going to call this trail 0. I'm going to check for the attribute game ball trail. If that equals 0, it's going to spawn trail 0. And to spawn a trail, I'm going to use spawn actor right here. Let me scroll down so we can see it better. And I'm going to spawn trail 0 in back of this actor. I actually want to put that in a timer. Let me drag a timer on top of this. Drag that up in here. And I'm going to trigger this timer every 0.02 seconds. Make sure it runs to completion. It's going to draw a ball trail every 0.02 seconds. Let me copy this. Call this trail 1. It's going to be basically the same setup. So when game ball trail equals 1, I want to spawn ball trail 1. Again, every 0.02 seconds. Now to get this trail to work exactly right, I have to make one other change. It's a change to the gun routine. In the shooting gun, I need to toggle between the 0 and the 1 ball trail. And what I'm going to do that is I'm going to change an attribute. Right there. I'm going to change the attribute game ball trail, and I'm going to set up an expression so it constantly toggles between 0 and 1. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take game ball trail. I'm going to do +1. I have to put that in parens. And then on the outside of that, put %2. So every time this is triggered, it's just going to, if it's a 0, it's going to become a 1. If it's a 1, it's going to become a 0. And it will do that endlessly. And that way the game keeps track of which ball trail is on screen, and it knows which one to draw and which one to erase. So let's try that out. There it goes. It's working. It drew the first one, and when I shot the second ball, it erased the first one and drew the second one. It's clearly too large. I want to reduce the size of that snowball trail. So let's go do that. I don't know how big it is. I think it's 25 pixels. I want to take that down to something pretty small. I'll try like 8 by 8. And don't forget to change the second one. Make that 8 by 8. Let's give that a try and see how that looks. Yeah, that's much better. So let's build a snow fort down at the end here and give us something to shoot at now that things are just about done. I'm going to drag in some of these blocks, and you may want to set yours up different. I'm going to add 8. So I'm just going to build something here relatively quickly. Stack up a couple of these. Put one of these in the middle. Put a board across. Oh, double click that. Scroll back over. Put a board across the middle of that. So what do I have there? 1, 2, 3, 4 items. I'll add another one of these, balancing on there. That's 5, 6. Let's see. Let's put one of these in, but rotate it. Get a little variety. Put that there. And then add one of these on top. So I think that's 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Alright, now let's see how that works out. And that seems to be working fine. I'll do one more shot just to test it out and make sure nothing weird happens. I overshot anyway. Let's do one more. I want to hit one of the blocks. Now you can see when the ball hits, it's still leaving a trail everywhere it goes, and I don't want that to happen. So let's fix that. Back at the beginning of this second video, I set up the ball hit Boolean attribute. Now we're going to use that. Let's go into the snowball and set that up. I'm going to add a new rule. Let me drag this kind of towards the top so it triggers right away. It'll trigger before the trails are drawn. You kind of want to make sure things are ordered right here correctly sometimes. So we want to check for a collision between the snowball and the ground, or the snowball and the bricks. And if it comes in contact with any of these, you want to make sure you pick any here, not all. So if it comes in contact with either the ground or the bricks, we're going to change the attribute game ball hit to true. I'm going to name this test for trail. Close that up. And then down here in trail 1 and trail 0, we need to make a change. We're going to check to make sure, to see if it's drawing trail 1, but then we also want to check the value of ball hit, and only draw the trail if that's false. And we want to make the same change to trail 0. Check the value of game. Ball hit is false. So if trail 0 is supposed to be drawn and the ball hasn't hit anything, it'll go ahead and draw its trail. So let's try that out. I want to hit something here. Let's see. There we go. So it hit the first block and now it's not drawing its trail anymore. Let me do another one just as a test, make sure it's still working right. Oh, something didn't work there. Let me see. I need to reset the trails. So to reset the trails, I need to do that when the ball gets destroyed. And that would be where I'm destroying the ball after 5 seconds. I need to add a change attribute in here and change the value of ball hit back to false. I'm going to copy that because we'll also need to set that in this group where it's checking to see if the ball hit the boundary. And if it hits the boundary, then it sets the ball hit back to false, so it'll redraw a trail on the next shot. So let's give that a try. Got the trail, hit the ground and stopped. Do another one here. There we go. Now it's working. Drew the trail, hit the ground and stopped. Now that's just about it. There's only a couple small things left to do. Let me go back here. One of the things I want to do is when you first start this, I want it to scroll over to the snow fort, show it to you, and scroll back. And that's going to be handled by the game controller right here. So let's go get that set up. If I go back to the game controller, I'm going to close up this zoom in and zoom out. I need to add a new rule, and I'm going to call this show fort. And I want to check for the attribute game start. If that's true, it's going to run a set of behaviors here to scroll over, show the fort, and scroll back. That's going to be handled by a timer, a couple timers actually. The first one, I'm going to set up to say after 1 second, and I want to check run to completion. I want to use interpolate to scroll the camera over to the snow fort. So I want to go back into the current scene, camera, origin, X to 1548. And I want that to take 2 seconds to scroll over. And I got this number through trial and error, so you may have to mess with that a little bit if you have a different screen size or if you're doing something a little different. I just tried different numbers until I got the effect that I wanted. So then we need to add another timer to scroll the camera back again. I'm going to drag that in here and say after 5 seconds, I want to run to completion. I want to interpolate the camera's X again, so I'm going to copy that. I want to interpolate that back to 0, so back to its home position, and take 2 seconds. And then the last thing I want to do is change the attribute. Scroll down here, change the attribute game start to false. So after all this takes place, it won't happen again every time you just start with a new ball in the game. It'll only do that at the very beginning of the game when start is set to true. So let's test that out and make sure that works properly. there we go. It worked properly, and I have control of the snowman, so we're good to go. Everything seems to be working pretty good. We're really just about done. Let me jump back in here. There's just a couple little things to do. And this is really just addition of the win and lose logic. If you want to do something with that, like I said, I'm not really going to do anything with it, but I'll put it in here. And if you want to do something with it, have at it. But in the game controller, I'm going to create a group and just call this level logic. And I want to set up a couple attributes here. I'm going to do a change attribute, game, snowballs. I'm going to set that to 10. I'm going to call this snowballs. I want to copy that and set up game blocks. We put in 8, so I'm going to put 8 there. And that will set values to these couple of game level attributes that we set up back at the beginning. Snowballs and blocks. And one other place we need to set up a value for that is in the gun. Every time you shoot, you need to reduce the number of snowballs by 1. So within the shoot gun routine here, I'm going to change attribute, game, snowballs to game, snowballs -1. So every time you shoot, the number of snowballs you have will go down, and then you could trigger an action when you reach 0. And then you may recall in all of the various blocks in one of these rules here, in the destroy rule, we reduce the blocks by 1 when they get destroyed, so that will keep track of the number of blocks you have in game. So let's play test this one more time, but I think that is going to wrap this up. Let's make sure. Take a shot here. Take one more, hit some of the blocks. They all fall, slide, bounce, just exactly like I expect to happen. One thing I see I forgot to do, which is really minor, is just make these couple actors invisible. Let's go back and do that so things all look correct. Gonna go to the ground, go to color, set the alpha to 0, and all that does is make it invisible. It doesn't take it away. It just makes it invisible so the player can't see it. I'm going to do the same with the controller. I'm going to leave it red, but just make the alpha 0. Let's take one more look at this. There we go. Now things look even better. Take one last shot just for the fun of it. There we go. So that's it. That is how to create an Angry Birds style physics shooter in Game Salad. I know we definitely covered a lot of ground here, and it might have got kind of confusing at times, but if you follow along step by step, I think you'll find there's a lot of potential use for a lot of these kind of routines and concepts. Even outside of an Angry Birds clone, I think you could, the camera scrolling and the trail behind the bullet. There's a lot of small things, small routines in here that could be used in lots of different ways. So thanks for watching. I hope you got something out of this, and good luck making games. Have fun.